Welcome to Bills by the Numbers, where we let the stats tell you where the Bills are at. We're presented by FanDuel. Make every moment more. Coming up, the Bills have made the bulk of their free agent signings. Where do those moves point the Bills in the draft? And is there a pattern with Beane's free agent signings that we can follow? Steve is quizzed on position preference in free agency and the draft, and we'll have our one burning question. Let's get to it! Thanks for joining us, as always, here on Bills by the Numbers. Bills Wall of Famer Steve Tasker, Bills play-by-play man Chris Brown with you. And Buffalo got a lot of work done leading up to free agency. They got some of their young core locked up to extensions, even got some of their role players back in the fold. And then when the market opened, they addressed the defensive line, the secondary, and the receiver position. GM Brandon Beane indicated that most of their available monies have been spent, though there might be another minor signing or two through the course of the offseason. The question now becomes, with the Bills signing 2 receivers and virtually everyone else on the offensive side of the ball under contract, could you see more than 1, maybe 2 offensive players drafted by Buffalo? They're pretty much set on that side.
They are, but I think they'll probably draft as many as 3 out of, if they pick all 10. If they pick all 10.
Yeah, okay.
If they pick all 10. I think the minimum number of defensive players they're going to pick is 6, right? So 6 out of the 10. But I think it'll probably be, if they pick all 10, it'll probably be 7 or 8.
Yeah.
They will pick an offensive player, particularly down as it gets down lower into the later rounds. Who knows how that's going to fall. And the guys they'll pick lower will almost always be trait guys, guys who have fallen and have the physical traits to be an elite player, but don't have the production or the character or the medical or something like that. So, yeah, I could see him picking, if they pick all 10, I could see him picking as many as 3 or 4. I doubt it'll be that many, though.
Yeah, one offensive position that comes to mind is tight end, not early in the draft, but late in the draft. It's a good class of tight ends. And with the Bills, pretty tight against the cap here, Quentin Morris, who's going to be a fourth-year player, or fourth-year player, he's no longer a restricted free agent because the Bills didn't tender him. He's visiting other teams. And I don't know if they can afford to pay their third tight end on the roster over $3.5 million. They may have to find cheaper labor at that position. So I could see them making a third-day pick on a tight end to fill out the back of your roster, or at least compete with a guy like Zach Davidson, who was re-signed as a reserve future free agent. I could see that on the offensive side of the ball. I know people are clamoring for an extra receiver. Okay, I'll listen to that. But you look at the offensive line, Steve. They have their starting 5 under contract and all of their backups under contract. They don't need a guy on the O-line at all.
That's right. It'll have to be a pretty special player if they take an offensive lineman.
They even have development players like Richard Garage, Travis Clayton, the kid from England that they drafted last year.
And knock on wood. Tylen Grable.
Yeah.
Let's not forget about him. He made the 53 as a rookie.
And they re-signed Vandemark and Alec Anderson. And you got Cedric Van Pran-Granger from last year's draft. They are loaded.
They got some guys, yeah. So I think they're set there as well. You can always make it a case for running back or receiver. Those guys, because there are plentiful athletes out there, because the big guys are hard to tie up because they're genetically different. They're hard to find. They're rare.
Not as many.
Physically rare. Athletes are everywhere. Good grief, I was drafted. So you can find those guys anywhere. And sometimes you fall one, you hit on him, he gets the right guy in the right organization, and boom, he becomes a Cooper Kupp type guy or a Puka Nacua type guy. He's got some traits, and everybody passed on him at least once or twice, and then all of a sudden he's a good guy. That happens even later in the draft. Christian Benford is a perfect example. So when you get down deep in the draft, all bets are off on position, side of the ball, all of that up. When you get to the 5th round, you don't know where they're going to pick. They may, goodness gracious, no. So we'll see. Yeah. But all that's on the table, I think, when you get down to the 5th round or 6th round.
Defensively for the Bills, it's clearly a different story. Yes, Buffalo landed 2 defensive linemen in Joey Bosa and Larry Ogunjobi and a movable front 7 chess piece in Michael Hoyt. But as we know, Hoyt and Ogunjobi will be serving 6-game suspensions at the start of the season. They're not going to play until mid-October. Could you see it altering Buffalo's approach in the draft when it comes to acquiring defensive line talent specifically?
No, I don't think it'll alter their plan at all.
They were planning to do it
Yeah,
anyway.
I think they're planning on it anyway. I think they like their young players, Dwayne Carter, Javon Solomon. I think those guys they've got some plans for those guys, but certainly they're going to need some bodies for 6 weeks. But I don't think the draft will be affected at all. I think they're going to take the long road, and they will, even if they get caught and don't get a D lineman or defensive tackle or defensive end, I think they'll stopgap with veterans on the open market, and just get through these first 6 weeks.
Bills did that a couple of years ago. They didn't get defensive line talent in the draft class, and in June and May, they signed Poona Ford and Leonard Floyd a couple of years ago. So that's something that would still be on the table. But I think irrespective of the suspensions, I believe that they were going to go hard and heavy on the D-line anyway.
Right.
To your point, the long game, because Bosa's on a 1-year deal.
Sure.
And A.J. Epinesa is in the last year of his contract this year. So you need people in the pipeline anyway, not only at end, but at defensive tackle, where we know Ogunjobi's not part of the equation for the first 6 weeks. And now you're talking Daquan Jones, Ed Oliver, and Dwayne Carter. That's it. So you need numbers.
Yeah, I don't think it's going to, for that reason, I don't think it's going to affect their plan in the draft. But what it could affect is the economics preseason. They may restructure one more guy than they had before in order to sign a more quality defensive tackle for the 6 weeks period there. So that's where it may alter their plan, where they have to restructure one more guy or two more guys who are available to do that in order to have the funds ready to sign a couple guys for 6 weeks. But it won't be too much.
And on the back end defensively, Rasul Douglas still a free agent, at least as the time we're recording this. They signed DeMar Hamlin back, added safety Derek Forrest from Washington, brought Dane Jackson back for depth, but they also traded Kyer Elam. So they remain relatively thin at cornerback, and it feels like they want to add more competition at safety. What are your thoughts there on the back end?
I agree with that. I think that's where maybe some of the surprise picks will come deeper in the draft. They'll grab some guys in the secondary to compete. They'll have some traits, and some question marks around them because they're not going to be high round draft guys, but they're going to get, I think, at least two defensive backs out of this draft.
I think 3 is probably the over under, right? I mean, that's probably what you're looking at.
2.5 is the over under.
I would say 3. I think 3. Yeah, 2.5 is probably the good betting number, right? But yeah, I think it's 2 corners and a safety, and it's not unlike what the Bills have done in the past. I mean, you go back to the 21 draft, and it's Elam at the top, and it's Benford on the back end. I could see something similar. Obviously, we know the innumerable amount of variables that the draft presents, especially when you're picking as late in the round as the Bills are. But I could see them, even if they only end up with 8 picks when all is said and done, because they're doing some maneuvering and they part with a couple of their draft choices, I still see 2 corners, unless they add some kind of veteran between now and then that, is not breaking the bank.
I think like a kid like Nick Emanwari or Starks or one of these safeties, if they fall down to the 30th, that may change. If they get a guy at the top that's one of these elite safeties,
stud safety,
they might say, hey, you know what, we'll just wait a minute now. But that, picking at 30th, unless they jump, they probably won't get one of those 2 guys.
Wow.
And that would affect him as well. So yeah, I think probably they want one of those elite safeties if they can get one, if they fall within striking distance. And how that falls is going to affect the subsequent rounds. I think 52, or I think the picks they have at 52 and 59 and 62.
56 and 62,
there you
I
go,
think
56 and 62. We may see them double up right there because of the way the depth of this draft. If you wait till 102 or whatever it is, they may not get a good guy. So they might double up right within those 5 picks and get 2 guys of the same position.
As for whether there are any patterns to Brandon Beane's drafting following the club's free agency activity. The only thing that's consistent, seems pretty obvious, over the last 3 off seasons, when the Bills sign and re-sign one or fewer players at a position, they have drafted at least one at said position. In 2022, the Bills did not sign a free agent cornerback. They re-signed one, which was Saran Neal, who's kind of a hybrid defensive back, to be honest, lost another in free agency, Levi Wallace, and then drafted 2, Kyer Elam and Christian Benford. Also in 2022, they signed one running back in free agency, Duke Johnson, lost another, Matt Breida went to the Giants, and drafted one, James Cook. Finally, in 2022, they signed a linebacker, Markel Lee, re-signed one, Tyrell Dodson, then drafted 2, Terrell Bernard and Balin Spector. In 2023, one linebacker signed in free agency, Traven Howard. One lost, Tremaine Edmonds. One was drafted, Dorian Williams. Similar situations in 2024. Only one safety signed, Mike Edwards. One lost in free agency, Jordan Poyer. One drafted, Cole Bishop. Only one running back signed, Ty Johnson, brought back into the fold. One lost, Nyheim Hines to Cleveland. One was drafted, Ray Davis. So applying that pattern to this year's offseason activity thus far, the Bills signed one corner, Dane Jackson, traded away another, Kyer Elam, still might lose another, Rasul Douglas, and many of us believe they will draft one, perhaps 2. Hard to pull a pattern comparing free agency activity with draft choices, because there are even instances where the Bills signed a lot of players at one position and still drafted at that position. Last year with receiver, they signed 4 in free agency and still took a receiver with their top pick in Keon Coleman. They signed 4 defensive linemen last year in free agency, still drafted 2 in Dwayne Carter and Javon Solomon. Brandon Beane can maintain that they stick to the best player on the board approach, but in terms of side of the ball, it's hard to think they won't lean towards their defense this spring. So let's just say, Steve, they keep at least 8 of their picks. How many do you think become defensive players with the roster as it appears today?
If they keep 8 of the
Let's
10,
say they hold on to 8 of the 10.
8 of the 10 guys are good enough to keep in the building, and say they're going to be on the roster.
How many are on the defensive side of the ball? What's your gauge?
6.
Yeah, it's 6, right? Like, it's got to be 3/4
You
at
got to have
least.
a half a dozen guys, and I'll say this too: of those 6, 3 of them have got to be contributors.
I think 2 of them have to be starters.
Yeah.
Starter potential in year 1.
Right.
Maybe not.
They got to compete
out
for
of the
it.
chute
They
in
gotta
week
compete
1.
for it. So I think it's a big number.
Because you could argue, you need a space eater starter.
Right. This could
at
change.
defensive tackle next to Ed Oliver.
Right.
'Cause
This could change in free agency if they get a young big player off the free agency market. Maybe. But I think this could change with free agency as in the second wave here and as we trickle out through the summer. I mean, don't forget, they got their best guy on the defensive line 2 years ago when Leonard Floyd was available late, and they gave him a 1-year deal. He was the best player they had. He was the best free agent signing they had that year, at least defensively. So it could still change. But I think, as always, and he said it last year, and it's true, your draft class has to contribute. You gotta nail the draft. It always comes down to that. And some of the patterns that you mentioned about how they did this was contract specific because they lost 4 guys on the defensive line. They had to sign 4 guys back in order to keep from having a positional emergency. They're pretty close to not having a positional emergency going into this draft. If that's the case, they'll take the best player. But it's hard to see them taking an offensive lineman.
Right. There is one position. I think corner is right now the most glaring position.
Right.
You might be able to argue defensive tackle because of the Ogunjobi suspension.
Sure.
Those two
Those are
probably
short-term problems.
stick out the most. Well, corner isn't a short-term problem because you're lacking numbers there. It wouldn't stun me.
Right.
It wouldn't stun me if you see them sign a low-budget veteran corner between now and the draft, just to ease the urgency of addressing that position. Because the last time they got in that spot, what happened? They drafted Kyer Elam and traded up to do it because corners were flying off the board there.
Right.
Moving to the back of round
There's
one.
always that. There's always that.
And as you always say, need is not.
It's a horrible talent evaluator.
Yes.
So, this draft, they're going to get closer and closer to being able to draft anybody they want. But there's certain positions that are just off the table.
Yeah.
You know, quarterback, of course.
They don't
Offensive
even-
line,
They
of
don't even need an
course.
offensive tackle.
They don't even. Yeah, they don't even need it.
They've got 4.
That's why even further and further we get into this, I'm more and more convinced they're never going to pick at 30th. Because if they get to this point where there's an offensive tackle up there, they'll trade down.
Yeah.
You know, or something like that. And if it's
For somebody that wants to get
right.
up there to get the tackle.
And if one of those, if a corner or one of those safeties drops into the low 20s, man, they'll jump.
Yeah.
They'll go up and trade a couple, 2 or 3 picks to Minnesota at 24, who only has 4 picks to
they
begin
only
with,
have 4 picks.
and give them a 2 and a 3 or whatever they have to give the value chart, and get the guy.
Yeah.
There's a lot that's going to go into this. I still do not believe they're going to pick that 30th pick, and as the closer we get in, they start signing guys. It'll become more and more likely or unlikely that they do.
We transition to the numbers game where Steve is going to be quizzed on position preference in the draft by Buffalo, as well as offense versus defense. All right, here we go. Question number 1.
Okay.
Since 2017, how many times have draft classes for the Bills had more picks on the offensive side of the ball than defense? So you're talking about 8 draft classes. How many times have there been more offensive players picked than defense in a specific class out of those 8?
I will say, I'll just 4.
Actually, it has only happened twice.
Oh, wow. I
The
took
20
a shot.
the 23
I knew it was. Yeah, that's what I was thinking. I was thinking it's either because I was. Whatever. I missed it. Whatever.
I don't need to explain how
I
my
don't
brain
explain it.
functions.
Yeah. You don't want to know.
The 2023 class had 4 offensive picks, 2 on defense, and the 2020 class had 4 on offense, 2 on defense, and a kicker, Tyler Bass. Question number 2. How many times have the Bills split their draft class evenly between offensive and defensive
How many times
players
has it been
since 2017?
How many times have they had even picks? How many times was?
Well,
Because they get 7.
that I don't have at the ready. I will tell you though, Steve.
Made it harder
If,
on me.
well, right, but you could have an odd number of picks, and for example, the Tyler Bass draft, you draft a kicker.
He's offense.
So if you have, is he offense?
yeah. Who's got the ball when the ball snapped? We do. He's on offense.
But it's a
Come on.
special teams unit. So how many times have they split their draft class evenly between offense and defense since 2017? 8 draft classes.
I will say split evenly. I'll say 3.
Believe it or not, it's 5 times. Isn't that crazy?
That's kind of crazy.
It almost
I
makes
wouldn't
you
have
feel
gotten
like
that.
they're doing it on purpose. 5 of the last 8 draft classes,
drafting on purpose.
the Bills
They
have
might.
split offensive and defensive picks evenly.
I am.
So maybe that's Brandon Bean's pattern.
I'm sucking in this.
20 and
Question.
2017, they went 3 and 3, offense, defense.
Yeah.
18, 19, and 21, 4 and 4. And last year they went 5 and 5. They had 10 picks. They went 5 offense and 5 defense. Isn't that crazy? I can't believe it happened that many times. Question number 3. You're just dejected right now.
I have no shot at these.
Question 3. What has been the most popular position choice for the Bills in their last 3 draft classes? If you had to guess. Pick a position.
Defensive end.
No.
Really?
I believe that was second.
Linebacker.
No.
Offensive line.
Offensive line. Correct. 6 in the last 3
That
draft
doesn't even
classes.
count. I got it right after 2 misses.
And part of the problem is you forget about late round choices like a Luke Tenuta, who was a 6th round
Right.
offensive lineman taken a
Right.
few years ago.
Yeah.
But they're all in there, and you had a couple last year, and you even had a couple the year before that. Question number 4. In the last 3 draft classes, what position besides quarterback, has been the least selected position?
Last three?
The last 3 draft classes, the position chosen the least.
Safety.
Safety is correct.
Got one.
It is in a tie with one other position. You want to take a stab at it?
Running back.
It's tight end.
Tight end, yeah.
Mr. Kincaid, the only guy taken at that position, and Mr. Bishop, the only guy taken at the safety position in the last 3 draft classes. All right, you finished strong there, Steve. Well done. Bills fans, get in on the action with FanDuel, America's #1 sportsbook. Just download the app today to play any way you want. Plus, with live betting, you'll get updated odds on games that have already started. Make every moment more with FanDuel, official sportsbook partner of the Buffalo Bills. Time now for our one burning question. Where do you believe the value will be position-wise, Steve, near the bottom of round 1, where we expect the Bills to be on the clock? Maybe not at 30, but they'll still probably be somewhere down there. Where will the value be position-wise?
I think it's going to be at safety.
Safety, okay.
I do, because there's like 3 guys at the safety position that are the
cream of the crop.
Yeah, that are teams are looking at going, that's pretty. You're never going to see. I don't know if there's ever been 3 safeties taken in the first round. There's just not that. And with the defense, and like I said, most teams are looking at prisoner of the moment. They're looking at what Philly did and how their team is built. They said,
big guys are always prioritized.
Big guys are always prioritized. They always get extra chances if they're not very good with one team. They're hard to find. So those guys go first. And safeties are played from the neck up. So even guys with great physical gifts may not be the kind of safety you're looking for, because it's a mental kind of thing. So there's a lot in the safety position that doesn't have to do with measurables and that kind of thing. So I think teams are going to stack up on a deep defensive line class and go for money positions like offensive linemen, tackles, and that kind of thing. And I think those safeties are going to get dropped down the board. I'm not saying they're going to be there at 30th, but they're going to be within striking distance, I think.
Yeah, I think safety is a good choice. I will go, because you said safety, and I think you're correct, I will say corner.
Yeah.
And the only reason I say that is because, again, in line with what is generally thought of this class, limited number of blue chippers, I don't believe there's more than one corner that would even fall into blue chip status. So knowing that, I think there's a very good chance you don't see the first corner come off the board until you're in the second half of round 1. Now, there might be a mini run there that could move them away from corner, but if you can get a top 3 or top 4 corner somewhere in the late 20s or even 30, I think you got to jump on that. And I think there is a remote chance. I think it's a little bit better than a remote chance that happens. If you can get the 4th corner at 28, 29, 30, somewhere in there, that's good.
Yeah, I'm looking at one mock draft. Travis Hunter is a corner/receiver.
Right.
So he's a different kind of cat. Then the first corner off the board on this is down at 11. It's the kid from Michigan, Will Johnson.
Yes. He's coming off an injury, though, so depending on how people think about him.
Then there's Nicky Manwari, the safety that I was talking about. And then it goes all the way down to Jahad Barron out of Texas.
Yeah, Jahdae Barron.
Jahdae Barron.
So I think there's a chance there.
That's 2 corners, and then Starks at 27.
And that's a safety.
Safety.
Who can play some corner. But
right, but that's what you're looking at right there.
That's why I think corner or safety, there could be good value at those 2 positions.
2 corners, 2 safeties, all the way to number 27 on this mock. So that's kind of where I'm thinking. You're going to have a shot at one of the top 2 guys at one of those spots.
And then we have to look at that and say, what is, at least right now, what is the more pressing position?
Yeah, it's corner.
It's corner.
Yeah.
So that could be the way. Could be a little guy in round 1 this year for the Bills. Not a big guy.
Could be. We'll see.
Yeah. Our closing figure deals with the positions the Bills have added to the roster via free agency most often over the last 4 years, counting this current offseason free agency period. The position with the 3rd most free agent signings of the last 4 off seasons is edge rusher. 6 players have been signed. Second is defensive tackle. 7 signings. And the top position in terms of signings over the last 4 off seasons in free agency, wide receiver, with a total of 10 including 2 this offseason with Joshua Palmer and Laviska Shenault. That'll do it for this episode. Be sure to subscribe so you're notified when our next edition drops, because when you need to know about the Bills, you need to check Bills by the Numbers. For Steve Tasker, I'm Chris Brown. Thanks for listening. We'll catch you next time, everybody.